The only thing Lydia owned outright was the fear that lived in her stomach. It felt like a small, hard stone, and every slight movement of her body seemed to scrape against it. At 22, she was the sole support for her mother, Anya, back in the village. The thin sheaf of credits she earned each month from the Stone family was not money for savings or dreams. It was just enough for insulin. It was life. She had spent 10 months inside the high, ornate gates of the Stone residence in Ikoyi, Lagos. The house was all marble floors and silent, expensive air conditioning. A gilded cage where she worked from dawn until late evening. Her role as the housemaid was clearly defined: clean, cook, and be invisible. For the most part, visibility was easy to avoid with Diana Stone. Diana Stone was a banker, a woman who moved through her own home with the crisp, cold efficiency of a ledger entry. She was rarely present, her time consumed by glass offices and board meetings. When she was home, she trusted her husband, Marcus Stone, completely. Diana often spoke of Marcus's loyalty and diligence, believing he worked from home, managing private investments. Lydia had seen the look in Marcus's eyes long before Diana ever looked away. Marcus did not work. Marcus watched. His presence was a suffocating layer in the quiet house. He would sit in the lounge, the television muted, his eyes tracking Lydia's movements across the polished floors. At first, it was subtle, a lingering glance as she dusted the entryway, a smile that lasted a second too long as she served his tea. Lydia, programmed by a lifetime of humble servitude, dismissed it as appreciation. She worked hard, maybe he simply respected her effort. The glances quickly hardened into something predatory. He began inventing reasons to call her upstairs. "Lydia, the bulb in the storage closet needs changing," or "Lydia, come here and help me file these papers in the study." The tasks were always flimsy, designed to place her alone with him in a secluded room. She started taking 5 extra minutes on the stairs, trying to time her arrivals when the gardener might be visible outside or Diana Stone's driver was pulling into the drive. One afternoon, Marcus cornered her by the kitchen entrance. Lydia had been scrubbing a spill from the tile, her back bent to the task. Marcus's shadow fell over her, cutting off the light from the window. "You bend like a river, Lydia," he murmured. Lydia froze, the wet sponge still in her hand. The compliment was not a compliment at all. It was a crude observation meant to strip her of her professionalism. She felt the blood rush to her face, a heat that was not from the Lagos sun, but from shame and fear. She straightened up slowly, her hands slick with soapy water. She kept her gaze fixed on the gold button of his silk shirt, refusing to meet his eyes. "Sir, I will finish the floor now," she said, her voice thin and steady, a practiced neutrality she had perfected over years. Marcus chuckled, a low, oily sound. "Of course, Lydia. Finish the floor." He did not move, forcing her to pivot awkwardly to continue cleaning the opposite side of the doorway, putting distance between them. The relief that washed over her as he finally walked away was immediately replaced by the stone-cold certainty that he was not appreciating her. He was hungry. Lydia walked to the small utility closet and leaned her head against the cool wall. "Don't cry. Don't speak." Her mother's voice echoed in her memory. "Let the walls hear your tears, my daughter, but never let your tongue speak against the person who signs your paper. They will cut it out and leave you to bleed." Lydia knew what speaking meant. It meant losing the job. It meant the insulin would stop. The fear of unemployment was a far heavier threat than Marcus's wandering hands. She swallowed the suffering just as she swallowed her food, quickly, silently, and alone. But the silence was beginning to crack. Marcus's eyes were everywhere, and the next time he called her upstairs, she knew she would not be able to avoid him. Her mother's walls were not strong enough to hold this weight anymore. The mounting tension broke on a Thursday, late in the afternoon. Lydia was in the main dining hall, setting out crystal glasses for a dinner Diana was hosting later that night. The house was quiet, the heavy velvet drapes muffling the city noise. Marcus appeared in the doorway of the dining hall. He was wearing an expensive traditional shirt, and his posture was too relaxed, too confident. "Lydia, come up to my study now," he commanded. His voice held a new, sharper edge. "I need you to help me check something crucial. It cannot wait." Lydia's hands stilled on a glass rim. "Crucial?" His study was on the far wing of the second floor, soundproofed and private. She wiped her hands on her apron. "Sir, Diana Stone asked that I finish setting the table." "It is a small drawer I need checked," Marcus interrupted, stepping closer. "It will take 2 minutes. You are wasting time arguing." His tone brooked no further refusal. Lydia nodded, the stone in her stomach expanding into a cold dread. She followed him up the wide, carpeted staircase, her footsteps silent. The house felt huge and empty behind her. When they entered the study, Marcus locked the door with a quiet, metallic click. Lydia flinched, turning toward the sound. "The drawer is here," he said, gesturing to a low mahogany cabinet by the window. "I suspect there might be a snake in it. We have seen them outside lately. Just put your hand in and check for me." Lydia stared at the cabinet. The excuse was ludicrous, insulting in its obvious fabrication. A drawer, supposedly containing a snake, that a wealthy man could not check himself. She stepped back. "Sir, if there is a pest, the pest control company should be called. I am not trained to handle dangerous animals," Lydia said, her voice shaking slightly but holding firm. Marcus laughed, walking toward her, closing the remaining distance. "There is no snake, Lydia, only me." He reached out, his hand catching her shoulder. His touch was heavy, demanding. Lydia recoiled instantly, stepping back so quickly that her heel hit the leg of the desk. The fear was replaced by a sudden, intense fury. The weight she had been carrying for her mother's sake was too heavy to be tainted by this man. "Do not touch me, sir," she whispered, her hands balled into fists under her apron. "If you do not open this door right now, I will tell Diana everything. I will tell her what you say to me, what you make me do. I will tell her how you watch me." The threat, spoken aloud, felt like a dangerous release. She knew she had just crossed the point of no return. Marcus did not look scared. He looked amused. He dropped his hand and smiled, a cold, calculating expression that chilled Lydia to the bone more than his touch had. "You will tell Diana what, Lydia?" he asked, taking a leisurely step toward the door. He unlocked it but did not open it. "That you tried to seduce me, that you were late setting the table because you called me up here for extra attention, that I had to chase you away?" Lydia stared, confusion giving way to a sickening realization. "Diana trusts me, Lydia. She knows exactly who you are, an easily replaceable maid, desperate for money. Who do you think she will believe? Her respectable husband, the banker, or the weeping housemaid?" He paused, allowing the truth to sink its teeth into her. "I will destroy your name, Lydia. I will ensure every family in Lagos hears that you are a thief and a seductress. You won't just lose this job, you will lose everything. Go on, tell her." Lydia felt the stone shatter in her gut. She had been foolish to think her silence would protect her. It had only made her an easier target. Her mother's advice, built on fear, had failed her utterly. The shame of being a maid was a lesser burden than the shame of being framed. She did not say another word. She opened the door, her hand trembling slightly on the cool brass handle, and walked out of the study. She went straight downstairs, retrieved her cleaning supplies, and finished the table settings, her movements mechanical. The dinner was hours away, but she felt a cold urgency. She had to leave, but first she had to try. She had to break her silence and tell the truth, regardless of the consequences. She had lost too much already by staying quiet. Lydia lay awake on her thin mattress in the utility room, the air thick with the scent of bleach and stale laundry. The digital clock on her phone read 5 a.m. She had slept for less than 2 hours. The plan was stark and simple. Wait for Diana Stone to return from her morning jog, which sometimes happened before 7 a.m., and speak to her immediately, before Marcus woke up. She would tell her everything, quickly and cleanly. She would accept the firing, but she would not let his lie stand uncontested. The truth, however fragile, was her last piece of dignity. At 6:45 a.m., Lydia heard the sound of the main security gate, opening and closing. Diana was home early. Lydia hurried to the kitchen, wiping the moisture from her palms on her apron. Diana was in the hallway, tossing her damp towel to the waiting driver. Lydia approached, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Madam," Lydia began, her voice barely a breath, "I need to speak to you. It is urgent. It concerns Marcus." Before Lydia could utter another syllable, Marcus descended the stairs. He was wearing a casual jogging suit, his hair slightly disheveled, lending him an air of harassed innocence. He looked directly at Lydia and then turned to his wife, his face a mask of concern and exhaustion. "Diana, thank goodness you're here," Marcus said, his voice loud enough to carry, but modulated with a carefully crafted note of distress. "I was trying to avoid bothering you, but I can't let this go on. Lydia has been acting strange." Diana frowned, her attention instantly drawn away from Lydia. "Strange how, Marcus? She's a good worker." Marcus stepped closer to Diana, lowering his voice conspiratorially, but ensuring Lydia could hear every damning word. "She has been trying to seduce me, calling me up to the study for no reason, lingering when I ask her to leave. I've been trying to handle it quietly, but this morning she was completely inappropriate. I think she's obsessed." He ended the sentence with a weary sigh, placing a reassuring hand on his wife's shoulder. Lydia felt the blood drain from her face. His preemptive strike was perfectly timed, perfectly framed. "That is a lie," Lydia cried out, her composure finally shattering. She took a desperate step forward. "He is lying. He is the one who called me upstairs. He tried to—" Diana cut her off with a sharp, furious sound. "Stop, Lydia. Just stop." Diana's face was hard, her banker's composure replaced by glacial fury. "I know my husband. I know his character, and I know yours. A maid, a stranger in my house trying to cause trouble." She pointed a manicured finger at Lydia. "I will not hear this." "I knew no one would believe me," Diana spat, paraphrasing Marcus's threat to Lydia, sealing her guilt with her own confirmation. The humiliation was overwhelming. It was not just the accusation, it was the cold, instant dismissal of her humanity. Lydia's desperate denial hung uselessly in the expensive air. "You are fired," Diana announced, her voice ringing with finality. "Now, go pack your bag. Driver, call the guards. I want her off my property now. Do not let her take anything that is not her own." Lydia didn't argue further. What was the point? The battle was lost before it began. She walked slowly to her room, numbly pulling her meager belongings. A few clothes, her mother's worn photo, her savings book with its zero balance, into a small canvas duffel bag. The two private security guards were waiting when she emerged. They were large, impassive men who treated her like a piece of refuse. "Let's go," one of them grunted. Lydia tried to walk with dignity, but Diana, standing by the front door, was not finished. "Drag her out like a criminal," Diana commanded, her voice laced with venom, "and throw her bag onto the street. I don't want her dirt inside my gate." One guard roughly seized her arm, the other snatched her bag. They pulled her, protesting silently, through the manicured garden, across the sweeping driveway, and out the heavy front gate. Lydia was wearing only her worn uniform dress and was still barefoot, having taken off her work sandals in the utility room. The guards shoved her out, closing the gate with a deafening clang that sealed her out of her only source of income. Her canvas bag landed with a soft thump on the dusty pavement outside. Lydia stood there, stunned, the morning sun beating down on her head, her bare feet already smarted on the hot asphalt. She was homeless, jobless, and completely cut off from the funds needed to keep her mother alive. She retrieved her bag and staggered away, the shame of being dragged out like a thief burning hotter than the pavement. She walked for hours, tears running down her cheeks until her throat was raw. She couldn't call Anya. She couldn't bear to tell her she had failed. Eventually, she found a derelict, abandoned shop space off a busy service road. It was filthy, littered with debris and broken bottles, but it offered 4 solid walls. Lydia sank onto the dusty concrete floor, wrapped her arms around her knees, and finally let the sobs rack her body. She cried out her grief and humiliation until the sun set, realizing she had nowhere to go, no one to call, and no hope left. The next morning, the emptiness in Lydia's stomach was an actual physical ache. She had slept little, curled up against a cold wall, the constant roar of passing traffic her only companion. Her fear for Anya was now a sharp, immediate pain that eclipsed her own hunger. She needed to move. She needed a plan, but her brain felt slow, thick with exhaustion and despair. She rose, brushed the dust from her dress, and tied her long hair back with a piece of string she found on the floor. Lydia stumbled out of the abandoned shop and onto the curb. The busy street was a blur of early morning activity. Cars, motorcycles, market vendors setting up stalls. She was looking at the ground, focusing on her aching, bruised bare feet, trying to navigate the cracked pavement. She was so lost in her internal misery that she barely registered the sound of the approaching engine. Without thinking, she stepped off the curb and into the service lane, heading vaguely for a small shaded patch across the road. A deafening horn blast ripped through the air, followed by the violent squeal of tires locking up. Lydia gasped and froze. A massive black SUV, the kind reserved for dignitaries or the ultra-rich, slid sideways, stopping mere inches from where she stood. She could feel the heat radiating from its massive radiator grille. The driver's side window hissed down, and a man's voice exploded into the morning air. "Are you mad? What is wrong with you? Do you want to die?" Lydia was shaking so badly she could not speak. She simply stood, frozen by the near-death experience, staring at the man in the driver's seat. He was young, handsome in a rugged, serious way, and impeccably dressed. He had a strong jawline and eyes that were initially blazing with understandable fury. But as his gaze fell upon Lydia, his expression began to soften. He took in her tear-streaked face, the dull terror in her eyes, the dust caked into her hair and dress, and her painfully bare feet. Her frail appearance was a stark contradiction to the chaotic traffic noise surrounding them. He inhaled sharply, his anger deflating into confusion. "Get in the car," he ordered, his tone now firm but quiet. "I'm taking you somewhere safe." Lydia hesitated. Strangers, especially wealthy men, were now synonymous with danger. "I won't hurt you," he said, sensing her fear. He reached across and pushed open an atrocious passenger door. "Just get in. You look like you haven't slept in a week." Numbly, Lydia obeyed, sinking onto the plush leather seat. The interior smelled faintly of expensive cologne and felt impossibly cool and quiet. The contrast with the dirty sidewalk was dizzying. The man pulled the SUV back into traffic, driving slowly for a few minutes before turning into the entrance of a quiet, upscale plaza. He parked and turned off the engine. "My name is Julian," he said, extending a hand briefly before pointing to a small, bright cafe across the courtyard. "Let's get some water, and then you tell me what happened." Inside the cafe, Julian ordered 2 bottles of water, a large cup of tea for Lydia, and a plate of warm pastries. He did not press her to talk. He simply waited, observing her with an attentive patience that felt wholly unfamiliar. Lydia drank the water in desperate gulps, the cool liquid easing the dryness in her throat. The sight of the food, the golden pastries, the steam rising from the tea, was almost too much. She picked up a pastry but hesitated, realizing her hands were still grimy. "Don't worry about that," Julian said gently, pushing the plate closer. "Eat first, then we talk." Lydia took a small, hesitant bite. The sweetness and warmth hit her system, and the dam of her composure finally broke. She didn't mean to speak, but the words tumbled out, a torrent of pain and humiliation. She told him everything. The years of silent struggle, the constant threat of her mother's illness, the stone house, Marcus's escalating harassment, the false accusation he had used as a weapon, Diana's blind judgment, and the ultimate crushing shame of being dragged out like a criminal. She told him about the abandoned shop, her bare feet, and the absolute despair of having nothing left to sell, nowhere to turn. Julian listened, leaning forward slightly, never interrupting. His expression remained serious, his eyes holding a depth of understanding that surprised her. When Lydia finished, sinking back into the chair, exhausted and spent, he reached across the table and placed his hand gently over hers. "Thank you for telling me that, Lydia," Julian said, his voice low. "You are not a criminal, and you are not a thief. You are a good daughter who was betrayed by a powerful coward." He squeezed her hand once, briefly, and then released it. "Now, we are going to fix this." Lydia felt a flicker of hope, but it was fragile, like a dry leaf. "Fix it, sir. I don't even have money for a bus to a friend's house." Julian stood up. "Come with me." He drove them out of the city centre, and soon they passed into a part of Lagos Lydia had only seen in magazines. High walls, heavy security, and gates that seemed to melt away at Julian's approach. He pulled up to a magnificent sprawling compound. The gates swung open silently, revealing a courtyard filled with tropical flowers and the soft sound of running water. Inside the house, everything was calm and spotless. Julian led Lydia to a welcoming, older woman with kind, intelligent eyes. "Clara," Julian said, placing his hand on Lydia's back, a reassuring, non-possessive gesture. "This is Lydia. She needs a bath, food, and a place to rest. Look after her. And no questions, please." Clara simply nodded, her gaze full of instant, quiet compassion. "Welcome, my dear," she said to Lydia, taking her hand. "Come, let's get you cleaned up." For the next few hours, Lydia existed in a peaceful blur. Clara drew her a hot bath, provided her with soft, clean cotton pajamas, and laid out a feast of small, delicious food portions in a bright, quiet guest room. The bed was cloud-soft, the sheets cool and crisp. It was the first time in 10 months Lydia had felt truly safe, truly cared for. She slept deeply for hours, the stone in her stomach finally dissolving into nothingness. She woke as the sun was setting, the sky outside the window a brilliant fading orange. Clara knocked gently and brought her a fresh glass of juice and a modest but elegant new dress. "He is waiting for you in the lounge, dear," Clara said. "He is a good man. Don't be afraid." Lydia walked downstairs, her feet clad in soft slippers, feeling light and strangely calm. Julian was waiting for her in a large, airy lounge, reading a heavy-looking book. He stood when she entered. "You look much better," he observed, a slight smile touching his lips. "Please sit." Lydia sat on the edge of a deep armchair. She looked at him, feeling a deep wave of gratitude and confusion. "Sir, I don't know how to thank you. I don't understand why you are doing this." Julian leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek, black leather wallet. From it, he produced an official identification card. He slid it across the glass coffee table to her. Lydia picked it up hesitantly. The card featured Julian's serious face, but the name beneath it made her hands tremble violently. Julian Vance, and beneath the name, the title, Special Advisor to the President. Julian Vance, the son of the President of Vesperia, her benefactor, the man who had nearly hit her with his SUV, was a political prince in disguise. Lydia dropped the card onto the table. I don't understand." Julian retrieved the card, replacing it carefully in his wallet. "My father is the president, yes. But that is only part of my story. I was not always like this, Lydia." He began to speak, his voice dropping in sincerity. He told her about a time years ago when he was young, reckless, and deeply troubled, having abandoned his family's expectations and spiraled into despair in a foreign country. He had been alone, broken, and at his absolute lowest point, ready to give up. A stranger, a quiet, kind woman who had no idea who his family was, had simply walked up to him, bought him a meal, and listened to his pain without judgment. She had given him a sense of human connection, a small lifeline he desperately needed. "She never asked for anything," Julian said. "She simply saw a broken person and offered kindness. I promised myself then that I would pay that gift forward. Not to someone who asked for help, but to someone who had nowhere left to turn, someone who had nothing left to offer in return but their pain. I saw that in you this morning, Lydia. The pain was real, and the need was absolute." He looked at her, his expression clear and honest. "Your accident was not a mistake. It was destiny stepping in." Lydia could only stare at him, processing the sheer magnitude of the truth. She had confessed her greatest shame to the son of the most powerful man in the country, and he had responded not with judgment, but with a profound, expensive kindness. Julian stood up and walked to a side table, retrieving a heavy, black leather folder. He returned and placed it on the table between them, its presence a solid, tangible reality. "What the stones took from you was not just a job. They took your dignity and your future," he stated. "I can't give you those back, but I can give you the tools to reclaim them on your own terms." He opened the folder and slid the contents toward her. The first document was a certificate of incorporation. Printed clearly at the top was the name Joyful Bites Catering and Events Limited. Lydia squinted at the paper, thinking it was a joke, but the company registration numbers were stamped and official. This is a company?" "Your company," Julian confirmed. "Registered 2 days ago, fully compliant with all fees paid." The second document was even more astonishing, a stamped bank document showing a new business account. The starting capital was listed clearly, $100,000. This covers your mother's medical care for years, Lydia. And it's the seed for your success, Julian explained. You told me about your cooking, about your dream of one day having a kitchen where you could make food that made people truly happy. Now you have it. The third item was a land purchase agreement. It wasn't a mansion, but a compact prime piece of commercial property, a shop space in a growing neighborhood, fully paid for, perfect for a catering kitchen and small service front. Lydia felt tears welling up again, but this time they were not born of despair. They were tears of shock, relief, and overwhelming gratitude. She looked from the folder to Julian, unable to form a coherent sentence. Julian smiled. There is one more thing. He reached behind his neck and unclipped a delicate silver chain. At the end of the chain was a beautifully sculpted pendant, a silver dove with its wings slightly spread in flight. He stood, walked around the table and gently lifted her hair, fastening the pendant around her neck. The dove is a symbol, Lydia, he murmured, stepping back. Hope, peace, freedom. The betrayal you suffered was terrible, but it was not an end. It was the doorway to your destiny. Wear this, and never forget the strength it took to survive that betrayal. The weight of the pendant was nothing, but the meaning behind it felt monumental. It was a tangible anchor of her new reality. The next morning, Julian was gone. Clara explained that he had immediate work abroad and he would be back, but that Lydia was welcome to stay until she was ready to transition to her new shop space. Lydia did not linger. She arranged for a driver to take her to Oshodi to see Anya, not to beg for help, but to pay for her mother's future. Anya wept openly when Lydia walked in, not at the poverty, but at the light she saw in her daughter's eyes. Lydia didn't tell her the full story, only that a kind, wealthy person had noticed her hard work and offered her a great opportunity. She set up a reliable long-term payment plan for the insulin and a small stipend for her mother's comfort. The following week, Lydia took possession of the shop. It was empty but perfectly situated. She dedicated herself to the business, poring over ledgers, choosing equipment, and tasting recipes. She didn't just want to succeed for herself, she wanted to honor the gift she had received. 3 weeks after leaving the stone house in disgrace, Lydia was standing in the new gleaming kitchen of Joyful Bites. The space smelled of fresh paint, herbs, and possibility. The first step of her destiny was complete. Joyful Bites, Catering and Events Limited, opened its doors quietly on a bustling Tuesday morning. It wasn't just a business, it was a sanctuary. Lydia had employed 2 young women, Maya and Beth, both of whom had been housemaids, dismissed unfairly from their own jobs after minor trumped-up disputes. She knew their fear, their vulnerability, and their intense dedication. They were paid fairly, treated with respect, and given a sense of ownership over the small, growing company. Lydia was building not just a business, but people. The catering kitchen quickly found its footing. Lydia's cooking was soulful and delicious, combining classic Oshodi flavors with modern presentation. Orders for small corporate luncheons and private parties started trickling in, then flowing steadily. The joy she had lost was now baked into every dish. One Saturday afternoon, 3 months after the near accident, Lydia was sitting in her small, neat office, catching up on accounts. She took a break to look at the daily news headlines on her tablet. A prominent image caught her eye. It was Julian. The headline read, "President's son, Julian Vance, unveils $50 million tech hub in Dubai." The article detailed his global success, his tireless philanthropy, and his role as a powerful, successful public figure dedicated to investing in young entrepreneurs. Lydia's breath hitched. She had always known he was important, but seeing his status emblazoned across an international news site drove home the truth. Her savior was a prince who had chosen to walk among the people. The power Marcus Stone had wielded over her was nothing compared to the quiet, dignified power Julian had used to lift her up. A few days later, a special delivery arrived, a thick, expensive envelope with Julian's official seal. It contained a short, handwritten letter. "Lydia, I hear your venture is thriving, and I am not surprised. The gift was not the money. The gift was the freedom to see the strength you already possessed. Do not forget that strength. Keep flying. Keep building." Julian Lydia folded the letter carefully, her fingers tracing the outline of the silver dove pendant around her neck. It no longer felt like a lifeline, it felt like a badge of honor. She had kept her side of the bargain. She was flying. She looked up from the desk, glancing out the large front window of Joyful Bites. A young girl, maybe 17, was walking past. She was barefoot, her clothes dusty, and her shoulders were slumped in a posture of utter defeat. She paused, staring longingly into the shop window at the bright lights and the cheerful faces of the two girls kneading dough inside. Her face was smudged with dirt, and her eyes held that familiar, terrible emptiness. Lydia recognized the look instantly. It was the face she had seen in the reflection of the black SUV window just months ago. The same pain, the same brokenness. Lydia stood up, walked quickly to the front door, and pushed it open. The bell above the door chimed cheerfully. The barefoot girl flinched, bracing for a rebuke. Lydia stepped out onto the curb, the sun glinting off the silver dove on her chest. She remembered her desperate night in the filthy and abandoned shop and the sudden, unexpected hand of kindness. "Sister," Lydia said, her voice warm and clear, echoing the kindness Julian had shown her. "Are you hungry? Come in. You're safe here." The girl hesitated, then slowly turned toward the sound. Lydia held out her hand, a simple, open invitation. The cycle of compassion was completed. Hope had found a permanent place to stay, and it was rooted right here, in Joyful Bites Catering and Events Limited. The girl's name was Elena, and at 17 she carried the weight of a world that had betrayed her as certainly as Lagos carried its noise. She was not a maid. She was a student who had lost her scholarship when her father fell ill, and had been walking for 3 days, trying to find work to avoid returning home empty-handed. She looked at Lydia's extended hand with intense suspicion, the fear in her eyes deep-seated and wary. "I don't need charity," Elena mumbled, trying to pull her gaze away from the brightly lit shop interior. "It's not charity, sister," Lydia countered gently, stepping closer. The pavement was still warm beneath her slippers. "It's a job application. We need a runner, someone quick who can handle paperwork between the bank and here. But first you need food and you need shoes. Come inside." Elena finally relented, stepping over the threshold into the cool, spice-scented air of Joyful Bites. The contrast between the outside heat and the interior calm made her eyes water. Lydia led her past the two other young women, Maya and Beth, who offered warm, silent smiles, and into her small, organized office. Within an hour, Elena had a hot meal, a fresh set of clothes purchased from a nearby vendor, and her feet were cleaned and wrapped in soft bandages to deal with the blisters. Lydia did not press for the full, painful history, knowing it would come out in time, just as hers had with Julian. She simply offered structure and dignity. "Your job is simple," Lydia explained, setting a small leather notebook and a pen on the desk. "You start with basic errands and inventory. I trust you. You are paid weekly, and you must promise me one thing. Never be afraid to laugh in this kitchen." Elena stared at the notebook, then at Lydia. She saw the silver dove pendant resting against Lydia's modest dress, a quiet, elegant piece of jewelry that looked out of place yet completely belonged. The sight of it felt like a secret symbol, a quiet endorsement of the kindness she was receiving. Lydia did not wear heavy gold or flashy jewelry. She wore hope. Joyful Bites settled into a routine that felt more like family than employment. Lydia ran her business with meticulous planning, inspired by the brief glimpse she'd had of Julian's world, where power meant organization and strategic investment, not petty control. She monitored her budget, maintained pristine accounts, and ensured every employee was treated with the deep respect she had been denied at the stone house. The culture was the opposite of the cold marble mansion. There were no silent, creeping shadows here. The kitchen was always alive with noise, the rhythmic chop of vegetables, the sizzle of oil, the vibrant, rhythmic music Lydia played, and, most importantly, laughter. The two initial employees, Maya and Beth, who had also been housemaids, often shared their own bitter stories, and now Elena hesitantly added her own. They were a collective of survivors, bound by the memory of injustice and the reality of their shared redemption. The fear in Elena's eyes slowly faded, replaced by the alertness of a sharp, intelligent girl who was finally safe and productive. Lydia watched her transition and knew that the investment Julian had made in her had multiplied. His gift wasn't just a company, it was the capital to generate more dignity. She often touched the smooth, cool silver of the dove pendant, feeling the weight of the promise she had made to herself and to the stranger who had found her on the side of the road. She would continue to pay it forward, turning every painful memory into a purpose. 4 months into successful operation, Joyful Bites was humming. They had catered over 50 events, earned a solid reputation for reliability, and their profit margins were exceeding expectations. Lydia felt a quiet pride in her ability to manage the logistics, which she secretly knew stemmed from the intense pressure-cooking environment of her maid service days. Only now she was calling the shots. Then the email arrived. It was from the office of a major international energy consortium, Global Tech. They were hosting their annual Lagos Stakeholders Gala, a massive high-profile event for 300 dignitaries, foreign investors, and local government officials. The event was scheduled in 3 weeks, and their main caterer had just pulled out due to a sudden operational shutdown. Global Tech was desperate, and they had been referred to Joyful Bites by one of Lydia's regular clients. Lydia stared at the contract proposal, her heart doing a frantic, rapid beat against her ribs. 300 people, a menu demanding complex multi-course international cuisine alongside traditional Oshodi dishes. The cost quoted was astronomical, a single contract that would match nearly 6 months of her previous earnings combined. The risk of failure was equally immense. 300 plates, Madam Lydia? Beth gasped when Lydia showed her the proposal. The presidential palace itself only handles events this size. Lydia felt the old stone of fear try to reform in her stomach, but she instantly recognized it for what it was. The habit of servitude, the automatic instinct to say I can't because she was once told she couldn't. She took a deep breath, reaching for the strength symbolized by the dove. This is our destiny knocking, girls. We take it. The next 3 weeks were a blur of intense, focused work. Lydia managed the operation with the precision of a drill sergeant, utilizing the capital Julian had provided to lease specialized equipment, secure high-volume ingredients, and hire highly experienced temporary kitchen staff who worked under her rigorous quality control standards. She realized the true value of the initial $100,000 was the freedom it gave her to execute. She was not scrambling, begging for credit, or compromising on quality. She ordered the best ingredients, paid her staff well and promptly, and invested heavily in impeccable presentation. This was not the timid maid of the stone residence. This was Joyful Bites, run by a woman who understood the language of high standards. The day of the gala arrived. Lydia supervised every detail herself, from the carving stations to the placement of the canapés. She wore a simple black suit, the silver dove the only jewelry she needed, moving through the large venue with calm, decisive authority. At one point, the Global Tech CEO, a sharp-featured European man, approached her as she adjusted a floral arrangement on the main buffet. I must admit, Lydia, he said, his voice skeptical but impressed, when I saw the size of your operation, I was concerned. But everything is flawless. The food is magnificent. It tastes like home, but presented like a work of art. Lydia met his gaze, unflinching. I do not promise what I cannot deliver, sir. Excellence is our only standard. The CEO smiled broadly and shook her hand. You have earned yourself a standing contract, Joyful Bites. Well done. That night, Lydia drove back to her shop space, exhausted but exhilarated. She had successfully navigated the demands of the elite world, not by being subservient, but by being the best. She sat alone in her office, the final successful event bill already drafted. The profits were substantial, but the feeling of self-possession was priceless. She had faced the impossible contract, and she had won. Lydia realized that the greatest freedom Julian had given her was not the money, but the space to learn that her competence was the only protection she truly needed. She was no longer just surviving, she was powerful.